Mary had been living on the street for almost a year now. She was a thrilled kid living at home with her family until her dad suddenly passed away. Her mom died very young, forcing her dad to go in for another woman. After the arrival of her stepmom, also known as Miss Cherry, her life became a complete mess. Even her dad ended up becoming bedridden. But now it was too late for her dad to regret his decision because he is dead and gone now, and she had also become a street girl and a school dropout thanks to her stepmom. She remembered when she tried telling her dad about how her evil stepmom was, but he wasn't ready to buy any of it. He instead lectured her for not being a good girl. Only if he noticed the kind of person her stepmom was, he might still be alive now. Right after her dad's death, Miss Cherry wasted no time in sacking her for her dad's home, leaving her on the street as she had no money and nowhere to go. All the lectures she tackled at the college were also unwilling to take her in with the excuse that they had their own families to cater to and that the economy was challenging. They were leaving her with no option but to drop out of school. If not, she would have been in her final years by now. "Ah, my stomach," Mary said in pain. Since yesterday, she had not eaten anything yet till the following day. Life on the street was an adamant one for her. To fill her tummy, she had to work on all sorts of jobs that could only make her as much as $1 or $2 in a day. Even so, that was if she was lucky. Being a young girl on the street also comes along with its dangers. You can only survive with enough luck by your side. One time, an incident took place, leaving her in a forever shock. One of the famous street lady bosses, popularly known as Auntie C, offered to help her out by giving her a job as a house help. Initially, Mary was pleased about the job offer. Little did she know that she was sent to her doom. Unknown to her, Auntie C sold her as a servant to some rich, ugly men instead of awarding her the job as promised. The moment she entered the man's house, he quickly locked the door behind her and tried making inappropriate advances towards her. It was then that it occurred to her that the kind of mess she found herself in. But then it was too late to back out now, thanks to the fact that she had been part of a taekwondo team right from kindergarten. She managed to survive the horrific incident. She beat up the fat, ugly man and even threatened to call the police should he try anything else. "You know what? I'm a cop working undercover, so if you like, try this crap next time, and you might not live to see the next day," Mary said to him and left. After the incident, she could not get a job again on that part of the street as news spread that she was a cop working undercover. As such, no one wanted anything to do with her, and her life became much more miserable. Today, things seemed to have taken a worse turn. She knew she must do something before she ended up dying from hunger. So she did the craziest thing that people in her situation would probably not do. She called the ambulance herself and told them her location. She had been unconscious, and it worked. The ambulance arrived within a minute or two, and she was rushed to the hospital. Her initial plan was to ask the doctor who would be assigned to her food to eat, but she has no memory of how and when she arrived at the hospital because she fell into a coma for real this time around. When she finally opened her eyes, she realized she was on a bed. But where was she? It was then that she remembered how she called the ambulance on herself. Luckily, she did so before going into a coma for real, or else she would have been left for dead on the street. Thank my lucky stars, she thought. Just then, a doctor entered the room and walked toward the bed. He looked very familiar to her, but then she couldn't remember where they had met before. "Oh, good to see you are finally awake," he said with a bright smile. "The other time you were brought, I couldn't get your details because you were already in a coma. Can I have them now?" the doctor said. "Of course you can," Mary replied. "Your name? I'm Mary Cook. Did you say Cook?" "Yes, please. Are you a graduate of Harvard? I feel like I have met you before." The doctor said just that. "I can't remember where or how. I also think the same way, though," Mary said. "Could you wait a minute? I think I know you," Mary said as she suddenly remembered how they had met. "You are called Jones." They both ended up laughing as Mary recounted how they met. That evening, Mary went home late after studying at the library. On her way, she met two popular bullies who threatened to beat her up if she didn't hand over her valuables. She was preparing to beat them up when Jones passed by. He tried to stop the bullies by standing in front of Mary to prevent them from beating her up. Unknown to Mary, Jones does not know how to fight, so in the end, Mary ended up saving him instead. However, they were unable to meet each other again because Mary became a school dropout not long after their encounter. "How come I didn't recognize you so quickly?" I guess it's because you haven't changed a lot. The other times at the hospital they brought you, and you were already on the verge of death. Thanks to the person who called the hospital in time. That person saved your life, Jones said. What if he knew that I called the ambulance myself? Mary thought with a grin on her face. Can you tell me why you dropped out of school? Because I know you used to be a brilliant computer science student who had several awards by then, Jones said. Well, it's a long story, but to cut everything short, my stepmom was thrown out of my home right after my dad's death, and I ended up on the street, Mary said. Oh, sorry to hear that, Jones said. Oh, don't worry, it's all past now. Dr. Jones, the director, wants to see you in his office now, a nurse said to Jones. Okay, he replied. Mary, see you later. Okay, sure. Jones, we have a case of a pandemic involving about 30 people. The course of this sudden pandemic is not yet known. Investigations are, however, ongoing, so I want you to be the head doctor on this case. I was hoping you could do your best and don't let me down, the director told Jones. Jones went in to check out the condition of the patients to see how best he could take care of the situation. So he decided to monitor the patients to see how an antidote could be made for them. By the close of the day, the cases have risen to about 50 people with no clue as to the proper cure found. This was his first time leading other doctors on a subject like this. This only meant one thing: he must get the antidote at all costs. The biggest question then was how he would find the cure. After a tiring day, he decided to go and check up on Mary before he left. Jones, what's wrong with you? Mary asked him, as he could barely hide the sadness on his face. There is the strange pandemic outbreak, and I'm leading the doctor to find an antidote for it. You can consider it as a test for me to become a real accomplished doctor. But the strange thing is, we can't even find the root cause and source of this pandemic. Moreover, there's no history of things like this occurring in the city before. There can only be one reason for that, Mary said. What could that be? Jones asked. It's artificial, Mary added. But how do we find the people behind it then? Jones asked. You can leave that to me, Mary said. How are you going to do that? Did Jones ask her? Well, I'm a pro at hacking, she said. Oh, I almost forgot. I need a list of patients you have with their details and your findings. Jones later returned with the documents that Mary asked for. See you tomorrow, he said. Mary worked all night, and by the early the next morning, she made a discovery. All of the patients involved in the pandemic were big-time shareholders in her dad's company. The question then was who was behind it and what was the person's motive. When Jones arrived, she told him her findings, and they both decided to pay her dad's company, which is now managed by her stepmom, a visit. Mary made Jones go into the office under the pretense of finding a job and used the chance to implant a hidden security camera in the unsuspecting Miss Cherry's office. Because apart from Miss Cherry and her assistant Huntington, all other shareholders were affected by the pandemic. They made a jaw-dropping discovery from the hidden cam that Jones installed. Miss Cherry turns out to be behind the pandemic. She decided to use it on the shareholders and then release the antidote, which would be very expensive and could cost them all their shares in the company, making them go bankrupt. They were just her initial ambitions, but now she decided to expand it to the general public by selling the drug, producing the antidote, and selling them at a very high cost. Jones and Mary knew that they did not have enough time. They needed to hasten the pace of their investigation before it was too late. The next morning, they followed the unsuspecting Miss Cherry to an abandoned building that turned out to be her drug and antidote manufacturing base. They called the police, who arrived on the scene and arrested Miss Cherry and her accomplices. Luckily, the antidote and her drugs were already produced, and the patients were saved with it. Jones was awarded for his contribution to the case. Mary was also given a scholarship to further her education for assisting Jones on the subject. After all their interactions during the investigation, Jones and Mary fell in love.